Hello, I'm Paul Gates, and welcome to the Academics. I'm here with Dr. Michael Wade of the Appalachian State Department of History and Dr. Nancy Love of the university's Department of Government and Justice Studies. 3 days ago, the people of the United States elected Donald Trump as President of the United States. Today, we'll take a look at what led to his victory and Clinton's defeat. And what about the unrest caused by Trump's election? Donald Trump elected. What led to this? Was it just anti-Hillary voting, or did Trump truly capture the minds of the people? Who wants to start off?
Why the whipping? As James Carville would put it, and Carville got his political education started in his parents' grocery store in St. Gabriel, Louisiana, where he grew up. Too many Nintendo political scientists on the campaign staff. Too many electioneering experts and handlers around the candidate with unceasing waves of statistics and scenarios, instead of what James Carville and Bill Clinton reportedly said they must do, which was to have a populist economic message. These campaign experts are a cottage industry which has outlived its usefulness, if it ever really had any.
Well, I'm a political scientist.
Okay, Nancy.
But
Nothing personal.
No, understood. But I have some different thoughts than the experts and the pundits in the mainstream media have been saying. And those involve the history of backlash in a longer sort of trajectory of American politics. So we had backlash post-Civil War Reconstruction. We had backlash post-Civil Rights movement of the 1960s. And I think we're now seeing backlash post-Obama presidency. So that's some of what's going on. I also think that in retrospect, we can say that Hillary Clinton maybe wasn't the right candidate for the Democratic Party this election. And although there were a lot of people who were very excited about having an opportunity to vote for a woman who might have been our first woman president, she's a policy wonk. She's a Washington insider. And this was an election that involved a populist movement based upon change. And then there were also the questions about her finances and her emails that continued to haunt her throughout the campaign.
You mentioned the emails, Nancy, right there at the end, or in the last week of the campaign.
Yeah.
How harmful was that? I mean, the margin was close. We know that in all the battleground states it was pretty close. They all went for Trump, of course, but was the last batch of emails, that last flurry, was that enough to have made that kind of a difference?
I doubt it. She did win the popular vote, although she didn't win the Electoral College. So if the emails had been the tipping point, I think we would have seen more of a difference in the popular vote. So I think Comey can be scapegoated on this, but what else could he really have done other than acknowledge the review of those emails, and then when the review was completed, say that nothing new was found that changed the decision that the FBI had made of last summer. I think more important is the question that Mike's already raising, right? How will the Democratic Party reach white working class non-college voters? And that needs to be done based upon the issues.
Yeah, which Mike alluded to a little bit there. How do they do that? I mean, this is, and what did make the difference? I mean, that's what we kind of started with here, is what explains this loss.
Before we leave Comey,
No.
I think it may have been made the difference. It certainly made a difference, and it very probably is a violation of the stated policies on what a director is supposed to provide. Mm-hmm. And in that case, it's a firing offense at a minimum. The other thing is that how how she handled it probably didn't help her either. I mean, this was a bald, on his face. I don't know about motives. On his face, a bald intrusion into the political process in an election season by the National Police Agency of this country. And it was followed by leaks throughout the upper echelons of the FBI. And then 2 days before the actual election, they say, well, we didn't find anything. Well, by that time, the damage is done, and what you're looking at is cover. As far as what went wrong, Clinton, I think, has herself to blame. How do you not listen to arguably the two best political strategists of their generation in the Democratic Party when they tell you that you must have a populist economic message, which is to say you've got to pay attention to the protest vote, which was not only in the Republican Party, but also in the Democratic Party in the form of Bernie Sanders. How do you ignore those people after the convention when they represented a guy who might well have beaten her for the nomination had the system not been stacked? That's
So we're back to, it's the economy stupid? Is that if you ignore that at your peril?
and ultimately lack of vision.
I think not just the economy, though. Trump played to what I'll call racialized gender anxiety among some white women who voted for him rather than for Hillary. Conservative evangelical over 45 without college degrees, by making his comments about Mexicans. And in doing that, he was, again, tapping into this longer history and the possibility of backlash politics in America.
Mike?
I agree with Nancy. It goes beyond the populist appeal. Why not let's say, just even for rhetorical purposes, address, tell the voters, if I'm president, there will be a thoroughgoing review of spending in this country by this government. A climate change mitigation plan, complemented by a jobs initiative geared to carbon-free energy development and infrastructure redevelopment, all of which goes to jobs, and tax relief for working people. If you're a serious person, how do you forget the blue-collar Democrats? And finally, rethinking what constitutes national security in an unstable world, because there were all kinds of fears and insecurities at work out there. And those go to those fears and insecurities, driving up Donald Trump's already very healthy negatives didn't.
Well, I think the most important issue that you raised there is what's going to happen with the Paris Accords and climate change under a Trump presidency. And that's a serious issue internationally. The Marrakesh meetings will occur. John Kerry will represent us there, but they've been compromised by this election.
Yeah.
Probably. I am trying to hold out. Trump seems to be the quintessential loose cannon on the ship, the deck of the ship of state. I want to wait and see just a little bit which way all of this goes. He was a liberal in his earlier incarnation in New York. So what's he going to be now that he has quote unquote arrived? Here's probably the most colossal ego that any of us have ever seen in American politics. He's rich, he's crafty, he's not particularly well educated, I suspect. but he does know the art of the deal, as he says, and Washington is all about deals. What if he follows up on that ethics promise he made? What does he really think about climate change? Did we hear it, or is there something more?
Well, of course, all this that we're talking about is his statements made during the campaign.
Yeah.
And of course, we've got 70 days now until the inauguration or something. Mm-hmm. We're not going to hear too much in those 70 days. That would probably not be appropriate for a president-elect. It's what he does after the inauguration, and we've got some time when we'll be able to speculate about that on a different program. What about Hillary now? What's next? I mean, what's next for Hillary? What's next for the Democratic Party?
Well, I think Hillary. I think that Hillary Clinton should be done. What this election demonstrated is she has no connection with ordinary people, as some of her own emails indicated. She was too scripted during the debates. For me, the sort of aha moment of the debates was in the last one when Trump repeated the absurd charge that she should have fixed the nation's problems during her 30 years in Washington. Actually, it was about 23 years in Washington. As First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State, there's the opening right there. None of those positions allow you to do anything like that. But instead of examining the inanity of the attack, she instead parrot-talked her way through her lifelong devotion to children. That was her response. You've got to be sharper on your feet than that. And if she can't look back at this after a while and realize that her considerable energies and talent should be directed somewhere else, then she's not going to reemerge even if she wants to.
She's not, but what about Chelsea? I think that's a reasonable question. What about a Democratic pipeline? And who's going to be next, right? And in terms of Democratic Party leadership from women. And Elizabeth Warren is still out there if she's willing to consider. Yeah, I don't know.
And how old is she?
Late 60s, so she could still run. Biden and Sanders, no. And the Democratic Party is going to need to reconstruct itself, obviously, as will the Republican Party. So that's a shared challenge that the parties will face. But I think it's really important that younger women across the political spectrum not regard this as a defeat for women presidential candidates writ large.
Well, is that going to be a result, or did Hillary's loss damage the gender pipeline, or did it set, as flawed as it was, did it set an example that will be followed in the future, not by Elizabeth Warren necessarily, but by another generation?
I don't think it did. I think this election demonstrated something that we should all be reminded of from time to time. She did not prove to be a very sharp person when it came to campaigning. We imagine that just because these people get to that point, not just Mrs. Clinton, but others, that they are necessarily ultra smart, ultra sharp people who are going to do well. And they're not. Just look at the people in Congress. What the Democrats need at this point is a talent search that moves beyond who symbolizes what, down to where are the capable people in the Democratic Party. How about Mayor Villanueva from Los Angeles? I don't know enough to say, but he sure looks promising. And there are others. Bring back Bill Clinton and James Carville and let them head up a talent search with other Democrats and start rebuilding from the grassroots. not only with the appeal and mean it, but also with the candidates.
There was a significant gender gap, though, in this election.
Yeah.
Close to 10 percentage points split between men and women voting for Trump and Clinton. So I think we have to think about whether that's going to continue going forward. And then there was also, and this goes back to my earlier comment about racialized gender anxiety, there was a split between white and black women in terms of support for Clinton. Women of color supported Clinton more strongly than white women did. And that's one of the many divides that this country is going to need to heal following the election.
Question. How were white women who voted by a considerable margin for Trump able to get past all of his assaults on women?
Yeah. Well, the sad story there, I think, is that many white women continue to believe that racial privilege brings a measure of protection. And so we'll turn to white men for that protection, even against what in this case was considerable evidence to the contrary, rather than, I'll say, assume the responsibilities of being free.
Well, one more question.
Yeah, go.
What if it had been Elizabeth Warren?
That's an interesting question. I would like to think that she would have had a greater potential of uniting white women and women of color behind a female candidate. But, we're now second guessing.
Yep.
And I don't even know that she is willing to run.
'Cause this wasn't foreseen. I mean, this gap was not foreseen until the election was over. I mean, we didn't know there was going to be that kind of split and that based on racial categories.
I think Donald Trump knew.
Knew that ahead of time.
Yeah.
Appealing to the safety moms and that kind of thing.
His comments about
Is that-
Mexican rapists,
Yeah.
yes, I think he knew.
I think that knew. Well, since the election, protests, college campuses, downtowns, blocking freeways, nationwide, not confined geographically anywhere. What about this? Is this just a release of frustration in the first few days after an unexpected turn of events, or is this setting an agenda? Are we going to be seeing this kind of reaction to a polarized electorate?
Well, we still need the Electoral College vote. So I'm thinking about the protests in relation to that. And electors, although they typically do vote with the populace in their states, are not bound in most cases to do so. There are unfaithful electors. There are also electors who choose to abstain. So the protests could potentially influence the Electoral College vote. But I think more important is to affirm the peaceful transfer of power that is a hallmark of American democracy. And I was encouraged that President Obama and Donald Trump both said that they had had a successful meeting yesterday, and that President Obama said that he hoped to follow Bush's president in 2008 and make the transition successful for Donald Trump, because if Trump succeeds in the presidency, the United States will succeed.
Do the protests threaten that peaceful transition? What do you think, Mike?
No.
No.
I think the protests, first of all, have been in the main peaceful. Secondly, I think what they represent is a warning to the new administration that they're not going to simply roll some of these things through. That people are going to stand up and be heard. I don't think they mean much more than that at this point. And the conservatives, if they can be styled that, really, already have an explanation out there. They're saying that George Soros is bankrolling these demonstrations across the country, which seems a little far-fetched to imagine that there's one mastermind behind the scenes influencing events in Chicago and all over the country.
Well, and the media, of course, is taking some of that heat too. The very same thing. I hadn't heard the George Soros, but with the media, the media was, had it rigged before the election. Is the media still playing this Machiavellian role post-election? Nancy, is that?
Well, the protests are an interesting story, but I think Mike has made the important point, which is that they're also, sounding a cautionary note that the popular vote did go to Clinton, and that there are many people in this country who do not want to see the variety of accomplishments under Obama's two-term presidency rolled back. And that message does need to be sent.
And I think there's a subset in there, in those protests. It's that this message about getting something done for American workers and things like that had better materialize and quickly.
Well, we're only 3 days post-election. Is that enough to make the impression on the new administration that's coming in January? 3 days of protests, or do we need more? Do we need some other kind of protests? Or is 3 days just a flash in the pan?
Tip O'Neill, all politics is local.
Yeah.
And what have you done for me lately?
So
3 days is a long time.
3 days, is that long enough?
Not really.
Is really the?
This is not a patient. This is not a patient electorate. They're going to. Trump better, I think, hit the ground running with some good things for the people who voted for him.
I also think we need to create the conditions that will allow Trump successfully to govern.
Yeah, sure.
We've elected him.
Yep.
Sure. I guess really my question, and I'm not convinced, I guess, of this yet, that is over yet, that people are at the point where they will be willing to give him a chance. Of course, that was the substance of the.
What other choice do we have?
Well, continued protests, or.
That's not a. I mean, it is a choice, but it doesn't get us anywhere.
No.
Displeasure at the election, fine. But how long should that continue? Not as a matter of propriety or anything like that, just as a matter of common sense.
Well, the other option is that the United States becomes increasingly ungovernable. And that's not a good option.
Well, emotion is a powerful thing. I mean, I think that's probably what's driving early protests, and coming to the realization that that's counterproductive might take a while, and I'm wondering how much. That's our program. For the panel, I'm Paul Gates. We hope you'll join us next time on The Academics.